How's everyone doing? Brandon, how you doing, man?
Doing well, my friend. It's been a great week so far. This past weekend, I went and I saw Top Gun, which is, anyone that knows me back in the day, I was a huge movie buff. But within the last couple of
No
years,
shit.
especially, yeah, huge. I used to have collections of movies. I went every single week. I used to have like one of those Tuesday passes where I'd get into the movies and I'd watch like a full matinee. And it was something like I grew up. It was something me and my mother used to do all the time was go to the
Okay.
movies. And it reminds me of my childhood. But honestly, within the last 5 years, I've probably seen maybe a movie or two a year.
Yeah.
This was the first movie that I've seen since pre-COVID. So I don't ever watch movies. I kind of, I don't have cable. I don't watch television, like stuff like that. So I went and saw Top Gun. And I will say, have you seen it yet?
No, me and the boys go Sunday for Father's Day.
Awesome. So I'm not going to spoil it, but I will say that this is one of the few sequels that I've watched that did not disappoint. It was incredible. So big shout out to Tom Cruise for holding it down and doing an incredible role. This is like 35 years after he originally recorded it. That's an 80s movie. So to be able to not only look great, act the part, and just they really brought it to the house. So was great with that. And then this week, actually, I just started a mini cut. So when I was down in Nashville with you, I had already been at the height of like my off season. I was eating a ton of food, and I kind of came back home and I was a little bit sluggish, having a little bit of issues with digestion. So I'm pulling things back to resensitize. And I had mentioned to you, and I'm pretty sure that I mentioned it on the podcast, that I landed a 14-page cover spread for an international magazine. Well, last week I actually ended up landing a book cover as well. So, I had some photographers reach out to me about doing photo shoots. So, I'm going to have multiple goals with this mini cut, obviously to resensitize myself, not only to the stimulus of training, but also reset my digestion, increase insulin sensitivity, which is generally not an issue with me, but I was noticing that my fasted blood glucose was climbing a little bit, pushing, 500-600 grams of carbs a day. And you saw when I was at your house, I don't ever stop eating. You know what I mean? Just to be able to get that amount of food in. And so then I also have that external goal of getting ready for photo shoots. And that's something, not that I'm very intrinsically motivated, meaning I do a lot of these things for myself. I no longer compete, but here's the thing. I really am a big proponent and a big believer in walking the walk and not just talking the talk. So I always lead my clients from the front, and I have a lot of guys in prep right now, a lot of clients dieting, whether it be for photo shoots or events or some for weddings, for bridal showers, things like that. So I want to, get right into the trenches with them and show them the example that I could lead, even in a short, truncated mini cut. But I'm looking forward to morphing over the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to document it fully, which is something I haven't done in quite some time.
I can't wait to create your OnlyFans. It's going to be so good. It's going to be so good.
That's going to be my main source of income soon.
Yeah, it's like main source of income soon, baby. We'll get the subscribers. We'll get them all out there for you. So yeah, my last 7 days have been good. Very, very low key. I got to go have dinner with a guy who's running for city council. He was in my local leadership group. And he actually asked me this interesting question. He goes, "What do you think the most misunderstood thing about you is?" I said, "Oh, 100% people think I'm angry." And I go, "They just don't understand." He goes, "I wouldn't really get that." He goes, "I just think you're very intense and very focused." I said, "Yeah."
I would say focus, but people misinterpret that. And I get that myself.
Yep. And I was like, the problem is I can see so far down the road sometimes that I'm just like
blinders on.
I wish this moment would just pass. And it's almost like I'm standing there annoyed that I even have to exist in this moment because I want what's down the road so bad. And I know I can get it. So I was explaining that to him. So he gave me some really good advice. It was super cool to like sit there and like hear his story and how he's like in his early 50s running for city council and some, stuff like that. I thought that was pretty cool. Hung out with Keegan. Nothing real cool. I go get my oldest son on Thursday, so I'm looking forward to that. I get Father's Day this weekend. We're going to go kayaking on Saturday, and then Sunday we're going to do Top Gun and then a nice dinner somewhere. So I'm looking forward to all that, man. Nothing too crazy. Business has been good. I think business has been good for you. For those of you who are listening and sharing our podcast, we appreciate it. If you guys would rate us and subscribe to us on iTunes and Spotify, it does help. And keep sharing, man. We really appreciate that.
If you guys could take a screenshot, you know what I mean? Yeah. Even if it's just right now in the middle of the episode, we always deliver value. We get a ton of good feedback. And really, we're doing this. Someone asked me, actually, he's one of Michael from iLead's members. And he asked me, "Hey, guys, or to me, hey, do you guys think you could do more than one podcast a week?" And I told him, "Listen, I would love to, but it's every week we are really scrambling to get this podcast together in terms of just our time. But we're really trying to give back back and trying to provide as much value within the hour that we could free up. I do this during my lunch break. Jeff has a very busy schedule as well, running multiple businesses. So we're doing our best to give back. And there are going to be other projects that we're going to be participating in and running together that you guys will be, part of. We want to make this a Chasing Clarity community. So we really consider you guys part of our family, part of our culture, and we hope to be able to build something to set the standard for the industry, but not only to do that, but to move it forward, because that's really where it's lacking. We're kind of in a space that has become overly saturated, but hasn't developed as quickly as it's become saturated. So it's becoming bigger, but that doesn't mean it's becoming better. And individuals like myself and Jeff and a lot of the other fitness professionals that we align ourselves and associate ourselves with are trying to move this forward.
Yeah, they asked me that same question. I was like, man, I got the Excellence Cartel and all these other things. I'm like, there's Justin, Brandon's got so much. I'm like, if we could, I would do a podcast every day, because I'm sure that we could take one topic and break it and smoke it out, beat it to death. But if you guys keep sharing it, we appreciate it. If you guys keep tagging us, we love it. Feel free to engage with us. We really do appreciate all the questions and all the good feedback. It really does mean a lot. But today, so the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about non-exercise activity thermogenesis, other known as NEAT. We've been talking about ways to improve your NEAT. We've been talking about ways to get active. We've been talking about everything from the benefit of nutrition and how to properly build out your macros and your nutrition plan in the first few episodes to where we're at now. So we thought we would take a break and take a couple of questions that we've gotten for our weekly Q&A on all things like non-exercise adaptive thermogenesis or non-activity thermogenesis. Sorry. B. All right, let's get going. You ready for this?
Absolutely. I do want to make a caveat, guys. I received just by myself, when I looked at my Instagram prior to coming on here, I received over 10 questions. We did have to, obviously, remember, we're getting questions, both Jeff and myself. We get a ton. So we picked out the ones that we thought would be most beneficial and would encompass the most amount of similar topics. So we were able to combine a few, but also I appreciate everyone. We appreciate everyone that reached out and had a question. It's not that we won't get to you guys, but our real goal is to provide as much clarity and information on a topic as possible, instead of doing those rapid fire Q&As where we give you like 2 sentences and don't really go into the nuances of the things that you guys are asking us. So we'd rather deliver quality over quantity, but keep in mind, we're going to be doing this podcast long term, so your questions will get answered, and we're going to give you, when you do get a question answered, it's going to be of quality that you're really going to be able to take a lot of the concepts. We're going to consider some of the context and really deliver you something that's going to provide clarity and provide a better understanding of what you're asking or what you're confused about.
I mean, I'm just going to dump it because I want to, but we have 2 guests coming on, Alan Aragon, and we have Dr. Bill Campbell joining us here in the next few over the next few episodes, which is going to be super cool. So guys, let's get to it. Oh, I didn't get as many questions as B. I think everyone's like, oh God, I don't want to message Jeff. And I'm like, I'm not like Jeffrey Sue. I won't tear you apart for messaging me and then screenshot it. I laugh because he always says that shit. He was talking about it on our podcast that one day. I was like laughing so hard I couldn't even catch my breath. But you feel free to engage with me. I don't bite, I promise. So but I did get a couple of questions, and so did B. When that being said, question number 1. What is exercise resistance? I heard you mention it in the last podcast.
Yes, so this is one of the concepts that I hit on in one of the studies that I covered last week during our non-exercise activity thermogenesis all-inclusive guide. And so exercise resistance is the concept that inactivity and extended periods of sitting causes your body to be resistant to both the metabolic benefits and improvements that you would generally get from training and engaging in exercise. And these include benefits such as the ability to efficiently burn fatty acids and glucose for energy. So to be able to metabolize and burn, both your fats and both your carbohydrates, and then clear them out of the blood, as well as the increases in insulin sensitivity that we generally get from exercise. And the research in this area shows that we cannot make up for being sedentary throughout the course of our days by simply bookending our days with a weight training workout or a cardio session, as an increase in sedentary activity or sedentary time has an independent negative effect on our health that we can only improve through staying active throughout the day. And this is because both our time spent training and time spent being sedentary essentially send different molecular signals to our body and have different effects on our health, which cannot be made up just by training alone. And I wish it was the case. I wish we could just undo a lot of the deleterious effects of sitting, but that isn't the case. And that's why I'm such a proponent of daily movement, of high energy flux, of steps. That's why we have a cool kids, walking club. We're trying to get people active and involved so that they're reaping the rewards of the movement that they're doing. And the issue for many of us is that we're becoming more and more sedentary with each passing year. This is both due to like the advances in tech. So think about it. A lot of us don't go to the store to shop anymore, or don't go grocery shopping. We'll order on Amazon, or we'll get it to go.
The grocery shopping you with
Uber
madness.
Eats.
It's madness with you. I was watching you.
I go every day.
Oh, I do. I was laughing. So I was like, oh, come on. You just find what you need and get out.
But I get my steps. And a lot of people ask me, how do you keep such a high step count when you're so busy? Well, I'm taking a call while I'm walking, or I'm always multitasking. So it's built into my day. And then also let's think about the society that we're in now. Since the pandemic, many of us have gone from working in an office, I'll tell you that was my personal situation, or on a gym floor, to working at home, which requires much less general movement and activity. And this is where exercise resistance can start impacting us, despite the fact that we train with weights and are interested in improving our body composition. So a lot of times we get this kind of narrow-minded view that, we train, so we're active, but it's two different signals to the body. And there was actually a study by Atkins a few years ago on the effects of exercise resistance that looked at how high amounts of sedentariness, and specifically sitting, can induce resistance to the metabolic benefits of training. So what researchers did was they took men and women and put them in a 4-day trial where they maintained a high level of sedentariness of over 12 hours per day to mimic the amount of time the average American spends sitting per day. Now, keep in mind, the average American spends between 13 and 14 hours per day seated, which is astronomical. But if you really think about it, you're laying down, say 7 to 8 hours, then you're at an office for 8 hours. So the majority of your day is spent seated. So a lot of people don't realize that. They're like, oh, I'm only at the office a few hours a day. It compounds. If you really were to take a stopwatch, which I'm not telling you to do this, but I'm just saying, I've done it myself because I'm very analytical, where when I worked in an office, I would take a stopwatch and put it on every time that I was seated. And there was 10-hour work days where I was seated literally 8.5 hours out of that 10-hour workday. And so it's just about bringing awareness. But within this study, they split participants up into two groups, where one group engaged in 1 hour of vigorous exercise at the end of the sedentary period, and the other group acted as a control group. So they didn't do any exercise. And the goal was to see how exercise would impact the metabolic or the negative metabolic impacts and effects of being sedentary, and to essentially mimic what many of us do, which is sit at work all day, work most of our days, and then, we get up and go to train once our workday is over. And so what they did was, the morning after the last exercise bout, they gave both groups a high fat, high carbohydrate tolerance test. That's what they call in the literature. But even you could go and do this with your doctor with an OGTT test, which is an oral glucose tolerance test. And so they wanted to test the differences in metabolic response between the group that exercised and the group that didn't. And the results were honestly astonishing when I looked into this. And the results showed that there were no significant differences in metabolic responses between groups, and that even the group that did an hour of exercise nightly after a prolonged period of sitting did not improve their rates of glucose, insulin, or fat metabolism. So they saw no benefits because they had spent such a majority of their day, 12 plus hours. Then they tried making up for it with 1 hour at the end of the day, and it still didn't benefit them. So
do shit.
Yeah, so these results led them to conclude that prolonged sitting and inactivity makes the body resistant to the effects of exercise, hence the term exercise resistance, which is why this group, even though they did engage in vigorous bout of exercise, didn't see metabolic improvements, and they were essentially in a very similar state. Yes, they burned calories and stuff during the exercise bout itself, but they were in a very similar metabolic condition to those that just stayed sedentary. And so a lot of people ask me, why are you so into this high flux, thing? Why do you promote that? And the reason I focus so heavily on getting my clients into this high flux lifestyle, where physical activity and steps and movement are part of their daily routines in addition to their training, is because it's the more well-rounded approach to ensure that we get the most benefit from their exercise habits, rather than just having some of the metabolic benefits negated by how sedentary they are throughout the course of their day. And if we really think about it, we all have different reasons for getting into fitness, whether that be you're trying to build muscle, you're trying to burn fat, you're trying to increase strength or improve your performance. However, the one thing most of us, or I could say, honestly, I would say the majority of us have in common, is we use exercise as a means of improving our overall health while we chase our other physique goals. And what I found is, with many clients that they think that because they train in the gym 4 to 6 times per week or 4 to 5 times per week, that they're covered when it comes to their physical activity levels. And the issue with this is that many of these clients have office jobs, as I do. And so with that, it keeps them seated most of the day, which has been further exacerbated by this pandemic, which leaves many working at home. So, despite the fact that all my clients work out, the vast majority of them are actually pretty sedentary the majority of their day. So this is where, you have to think about the time you spend home and inactive and how that's risen. And you need to realize that there are negative effects to that. So just try to incorporate some movement so you can negate this exercise resistance.
Ask a split off question.
Absolutely.
Okay. So is this similar, because we might get this question, so I want to go ahead and step in front of it. Is this similar to weight loss resistance due to chronic exercise that you hear being touted in the industry, or just, let's say, weight loss resistance?
I want Jeff expand a little bit upon the concept of weight loss resistance, because I hear this. This isn't in the literature, and so I hear this being claimed by a lot of practitioners, and everyone has a different definition to it. So give me your definition specifically.
So what you're seeing is no matter what people do, their body does not respond. What you'll see by that is generally the target avatar in this situation would be a female doing 1 to 2 workouts a day, chronically eating low, and they would get something known as weight loss resistance. And you also will sometimes see, depending upon how you build them back up, like if you try to reverse them or whatever, there's usually underlying issues of hypoadrenalism. It really gets deep when you go into it. But what you're seeing is something touted as weight loss resistance. And to be honest with you, I don't really think I've ever made sense of it because I don't know how it really exists, because I'm just the mindset well, no shit. If you overwork your problem constantly, it's you just will eventually look worse and get worse. And I correlate that to bodybuilding. I think it was ingrained into me. If you train 7 days a week, no matter what your nutrition's you're eventually going to get into a point it stalls because inflammation gets so high. So if anything, I think weight loss resistance, what they're trying to say, is mostly a overtraining inflammation marker. And the only way to do that is pull that down. But I didn't know if you see sometimes people saying that they're just, no matter what exercise in quotes they do, nothing works. So
if they're sedentary the rest of their day, so for instance, what we see is a large compensation from exercise. So you'll have, and I've encountered this many times, especially with females, and I don't want to specifically target females, but it is more prominent or more prevalent with females, is that they'll come to me and they're having issues with weight loss. And it's really because they're in a state of low energy availability, meaning that they're suffering from what's called relative energy deficiency in sport, which was formerly known, before they actually brought men into this criteria, it was known as the female athlete triad. So they have downregulated menstrual cycles. They have downregulated hormones, including thyroid, leptin, increased ghrelin. They have markers of high inflammation, so potentially high CRP. We see all these deleterious effects because they train really hard. So this happens with endurance athletes. This happens with CrossFit athletes. We see this even within the general population in those that do a lot of HIIT classes, and they're doing very high intensity activities, but then they're compensating the rest of their day. They're seated more. So this is actually a different concept because we're separating exercise and we're separating movement. So what exercise resistance is referring to is that you will not get the full benefits of exercise, regardless of how much or how little you're doing, if you are sedentary the vast majority of your day, because sedentariness and high amounts of sitting actually cause you to get impairments in glucose metabolism. So your ability to handle carbohydrates and absorb and uptake carbohydrates, your ability to not only clear fatty acids out of the blood, but to oxidize them as energy. So you become metabolically inflexible, which is one step closer to insulin resistance.
Yeah,
and so
your mitochondria is hit too, because
absolutely. So you're not, you're trying to make up for it for the end of the day. And it would be a great concept if it actually worked. But this is really where I see where someone will be an exerciser. There'll be what I refer to as an active couch potato, meaning that they're really active in the gym, but the rest of the day they're seated, they're at a desk, they're very inactive. They don't realize until I have them use a Fitbit or a step counter how sedentary they actually are, and they think that they should be getting better results because they're in the gym crushing themselves. But if you're either A, seated all day because of your job or because of your lifestyle, or B, you're hitting so hard. Like I know so many people that have said they do 45 minutes to an hour of hit. And, we can debate whether that's really hit or not, but
Yeah, different
that's
story.
nonetheless. However, they're then sitting and they're compensating the rest of the day more because of that high level of vigorous activity in a compressed bout of time. Then they're actually on the couch more. They're laying down more. They're less likely to do general activities, whether it be with their kids, or they're less likely to go pick up the mail. And it's the same thing we see with high level bodybuilders or even amateur competitors. Towards the end of the prep, everything gets down regulated. So now fat loss becomes more and more difficult. Think about when you're metabolically adapted and you're in this state where you're at very low amounts of calories and you seem like the weight can't come off. You're training hard in the gym, you're hitting your cardio, but if you're seated all the time, you're not getting those same fat loss benefits. And
that's what most people do.
Absolutely. That's what most people do. However, that's when someone like myself or you that started utilizing this high flex approach, we started incorporating that into our fat loss phases and into our, contest preps. And we saw the benefit where we were able to eat more and lose more because we were more active throughout the course of the day. We didn't add anything to our training. We didn't add anything to our intentional cardio bouts. We didn't do more HIIT training. We did more steps, more walks, and more daily movement. I stood more than I sat. Things like that, easy ways to increase that. And it also has a massive metabolic benefit. And I'll tell you that personally, that I track blood glucose with 90% of my clients. And I know that you do as well for yourself. And we've seen I'm telling you that lately my blood glucose has climbed, and we're talking about I'm averaging 87 milligrams per deciliter. That's still well within the healthy range. But for me, I'm used to measuring between 78 and 80. And so for me, that's quite an elevation, almost 10%. And so that's why I'm going to this mini cut, but I'm still physically active, even at the height of a building phase as I just got out of.
Yeah, I think here's a big thing. You have exercise resistance. And I think from some of the stuff, people kind of just will create names for things or just try to label it and I get that. Because for a long time, everybody argued the progesterone steal. Well, you can't really steal. And I'm like, yeah, but you explain that to Mrs. Jones. She'll understand progesterone steal better than hormones that unlock and lock. And I'm like, you start throwing that shit out there, they get confused.
I understand that some people try to simplify it, but I do think that a lot of people try to sell a narrative.
Right.
So with this weight loss resistance, it sounds sexier than relative energy deficiency. But if you actually look in the literature, we have a ton of literature on relative energy deficiency in sport, or now it's even termed relative energy deficiency syndrome. And that, applies to not only athletes, but non-athletes. And so we can actually do a full episode on that. But that kind of seems in line with what you consider to be weight loss resistance. It is not in line with what a lot of practitioners in the space or coaches claim weight loss resistance is, which is essentially metabolic damage, which we know it doesn't exist. That doesn't exist in the literature nor in real life. And that's something we're going to do a full episode on because I'm going to debunk the myth of metabolic damage because I've been doing that for years.
Now, I wanted to ask you this. You're listening to the podcast. Are you kind of doing what I do to quote unquote people who are weight loss resistant, where you start on more per se what you would perceive in a deficit, but start installing the daily NEAT tricks. So that way you're able, as you raise calories, as their needs moving up, you could get them moving through the energy sources the way you want them to.
I'm going to address this in two parts. If I have someone that comes to me with weight loss resistance, the first thing I work on is their mindset. The first 100%. Thing I get them out of is that damage mentality that they've been sold from other coaches, where they have this self-limiting belief that something's wrong with them. Because weight loss resistance implies, and same thing with metabolic damage, that something's wrong and you need a solution and you need a fix. I'm a problem solver, but I'm not a fixer. You know what I mean? That's not what I do as a coach, and I don't sell that narrative to people. And I think a lot of coaches within the space do that because they're trying to make their methodologies or their protocols or their practices more sexier and a little bit more inviting. And it's like, you need me. And I don't find that. I want to help people. I don't want to sell them something that makes them feel like they're damaged and that they need something, or they're going to be permanently, unable to lose weight. And so I really work on their mindset first and foremost, but I do increase their energy flex. But generally, if I see that they're doing very high amounts of, intense exercise, they're doing cardio, I'm pulling back on that. I'm lowering stress. I'm incorporating more parasympathetic nervous system activating activities, walks, meditation, things that are going to help with vagal tone. I'm going to increase energy availability because generally they're in a low energy availability state, whether that be from over restricting calories or overdoing intense exercise. And so I'm working on multiple fronts, and then I am incorporating movement, but low intensity activity like your knee, like your steps, like standing instead of sitting. And so that they're still burning more calories and we're able to keep them at energy balance rather than in a massive deficit like they have been. And they're crushed and overly sympathetic or fight or flight state where I see these cortisol elevations on their blood work, and I see that their hormones are, in a suppressed, downregulated state. And so I'm really working on both in the internal, but generally, I have this primer phase I go to, and that's generally where I'll put them in, where I'm trying to prime their internal physiology so that
Correct.
they're primed and ready for the next phase, whether that be a fat loss phase or a building phase or whatever it may be, the next goal that they have. But I'm really working on all the internal mechanisms to fix, I don't want to say fix, I apologize for even using that statement, but to optimize the things that have been bottlenecks within their physiology as well as in their mentality.
I think the word fixed is going to be correct when it's viewed through the lens of most clients you're working with, because you are technically like, hey, this is something that you don't really need to do again. So you kind of look at it as fixing it. I did want to talk about this, though. We're doing terrible because we're only on question number 1 still, but as a pipe off of it, we mentioned earlier about HIT, and we both kind of made like passive aggressive statements about, if that's really HIT. And there's literature showing that HIT does improve HRV. I've been using it for a couple of years to improve my HRV, but I do like 5 to 10 minutes depending upon how I feel. Me and Brandon were saying that when someone says, oh, I do high intensity for 30 minutes straight, we're like, yeah, but do you? Because like if you do wind gates, like you do 3 or 4 of those, like creeping death is there, man. Like it's bad. So Brandon, let's talk about that real quick. Let's unpack that, because we'll get questions about that, about HIT. What is your definition of HIT?
Jeff, I want you to define your definition of HIT, because I think we're actually going to be in different directions based on what you just said.
My thoughts to it is maintaining similar power output for a consistent amount of time where your heart rate's elevated above 85%.
Yeah, so actually in the literature, this is something I've changed my mind about. And so I made that comment in terms of the total duration. If someone says they're actually doing high intensity intervals for 60 minutes, that's already an aerobic threshold. Meaning if Correct. You're doing something for such a long period of time, it's really, unless you are an Olympic level sprinter, you're not going to be able to maintain that threshold. But actually, this is something I've changed my opinion on just as of recently, because of some research that's come out that both Greg Nuckols and Dr. Eric Trexler have covered. And so HIT is actually defined. It could be up to 4-minute bouts. So a lot of people will say, if you're doing anything more than a minute of a high intensity interval followed by a few minutes of rest, it is in high intensity. There's actually literature that defines HIT by up to 4 minutes. So if you guys are doing anything more than 4-minute intervals at a high intensity, because we can maintain 80% or 85% of VO2 max or maximum heart rate capacity for up to 4 minutes. And so I've changed my mind on that a little bit, but really what I'm referring to when I made that comment, coyly, is the fact that if you're doing these really long durations, it's just not going to be attainable, because your power output is going to be lowered. But also we have to think about the fact that it's just not realistic to maintain an anaerobic. So HIT interval is supposed to work off of mostly glucose metabolism. So you go into an anaerobic threshold, which relies more on glycogen because it's a higher intensity activity. But if you're mostly utilizing fatty acids, which is aerobically based, you're utilizing aerobic metabolism, so you're burning body fat for energy. That's an aerobic activity, and that's what we would do with doing walking or low intensity steady state or moderate intensity steady state. So anything within that spectrum, really we start seeing there's something called the crossover effect, and this was done research in the 70s or 80s by Burks and Mercer. And what we saw was over 70% VO2 max is when you start crossing over and preferentially burning glucose for energy. But it's a crossover, meaning you're still burning fatty acids, but you're predominantly burning glucose. Over 80%, you're going to go, higher and higher into glucose metabolism. And so one reason I don't prescribe or I don't encourage HIT is because we've seen that it causes more both peripheral, meaning in the muscle, but also neuromuscular fatigue. So you're having more systemic fatigue. And then also it causes higher elevations of cortisol because it is a sympathetic activity. Think about it even from an evolutionary perspective. The only time we sprinted was to get away from something or to, fight or flight. And so with that, if I have someone that's in this low energy availability state, I first don't want them to be burning through all their carbohydrates, which they could be utilizing for a more intense activity, such as weight training, which needs to be fueled by glucose. But also, I want to make sure that they're not over secreting cortisol and increasing the catecholamine release and all these stress hormones, which is causing them to only suffer more from the symptoms they're already having.
Right. Okay. But what about the people, say, who are concerned about their cardiovascular health, including some form of HIT? Because HIT does, help improve your resting heart rate. It does help improve your HRV. At what point do you say it's too much? Assuming a person's not in a low energy threshold state, and they're just saying normal person that can train normally and all that. How do you implement HIIT, or do you still not implement HIIT? Because I put HIIT in and then I drop it to miss. I like to do that, especially with guys. Guys respond really well to short bouts of cardio, as far as physique changes from what I've seen from the people I work with.
And it's so person dependent, because I work
True,
with
it
people.
is.
You have a
Yeah.
little bit more of a similar demographic, and I work with, lifestyle Lisa to IFBB Pro Olympia competitors.
Let's
So
just split the
really
difference.
difficult.
Just your general, like what
But
you would
generally,
kind of do.
I actually I don't use it anymore. I very rarely use HIIT. I don't think, because I'm tracking all these metrics off the bat, I'm able to improve people's resting heart rate, their blood pressure. I don't really track HRV because I've done some courses on that, and it's just not really relating to. It does relate to recovery status, but it isn't. We just don't have enough data on it, to be honest with you.
100%. I agree. I've always said that about it. It's great.
It is nice to track trends over time.
Yeah, trends over time, but the tech is nowhere near what it needs to be to give you
Absolutely.
100% accuracy.
Especially with what most people are using, your iPhone or your iWatch, or we're not using polysomnography for sleep. We're not utilizing the real apparatuses. If you go to a research lab, it's $30,000 to get a real HRV score, or a $30,000 module, not a $200 watch. And so I will use HIIT on occasion, but it's very rarely. And when I do, it's in short bouts, and it's very infrequently, meaning maybe 2 to 3 times a week.
Yep.
And that's for multiple reasons, not only because there is a larger recovery cost on HIIT training in and of itself. And I really want to prioritize, especially people come to me for body composition. So I can have them burn calories throughout the day. I don't really need that for that. If someone has really aerobic issues, which I really need to increase their aerobic conditioning, I generally do it through moderate intensity, steady state activity. So I'm keeping them at an elevated heart rate, but it's not so elevated that they're overly stressed in terms of their actual body, their physiology, but they're doing things for long duration. So 45 minutes, 60 minutes, I want them to be able to do something straight. Sometimes I'll have them do only nose breathing during their aerobic activity to really, it's going to help keep them in a parasympathetic state, but it's also going to increase their aerobic conditioning levels. And so there's multiple things that I do, but very rarely at this point. I did use HIIT, and believe me, we come from the era where we used to do HIIT only in contest preps. And I think we all saw the fallout on that, because A, most of our legs shrunk. B, we were systemically taxed. C, it impaired a lot of our resistance training sessions, because if you do a really intense bout of 10 or 20 minutes of HIIT and you have to train legs the next day, you're sore. You have increased DOMs, you have increased muscular damage. And we see that in the literature, and then even in the real world. So
yeah, I think it's dose dependent, and how I usually structure is 5 intervals, 30, and then 10 minutes of miss at the end of a workout 2-3 times a week, just to kind of keep things going. So you guys hear 2 coaches doing it 2 different ways with 2 different populations, different backgrounds. 100%. I think so. I really like using it with women, because a lot of women like doing cardio, and I like to give them miss just a little bit post workout. I think it's good, to let them do it, because it keeps them more engaged. The clients who like the stuff they do will stay with the stuff longer, is what I've always found out. Like telling a client not to train, I just don't understand. But question number 2. Shit, yeah, no, God, man, we went down a terrible hole there. As you guys see now, imagine our conversations privately that we have. What if someone can't go for long walks throughout the course of their workday? I know you mentioned exercise snacks before, and I was going to have you talk about that, and then I will give my thoughts on what I usually will tell people to do.
All right. So if you are unable to, say you don't have the time to fit in longer bouts of activity, that's where I'd utilize what's called as an exercise snack. And exercise snacking is the idea that during a work break or a break throughout your day, you do a few minutes of working or something of activity, such as a set of push-ups or air squats, instead of getting a calorie-dense snack. So you're replacing one habit that could be holding you back from your body composition goals with another. And the goal essentially is to provide your body with a break from mentally demanding work and switch up the stimulus by providing your body with a dose of physical activity to break up the sedentary nature of your workday. And in particular, this person that reached out to me said that they struggled because they only got 15-minute breaks throughout the course of their day for just breaks throughout their day, and then a 30-minute lunch. And generally it takes them 20 minutes to eat. And they were struggling with keeping up with steps. And so what I proposed to this person, or, what I discussed, was the whole concept of exercise snacking. And it's not just going to have the physical activity benefits, like getting, blood flowing and also increasing energy expenditure and increasing activity and NEAT, but it also provides your brain with endorphins, which will help with both cognition and mood. So it allows you to break up your movement into more manageable, feasible, and more frequent blocks. So an example of this is, for someone that can do steps, instead of doing a 30-minute cardio session, whether it be in the morning or post-workout, or during your lunch break. Instead, break it up into 3 10-minute walks throughout the day. And this has the benefit of not only breaking up your sedentary time, it's spreading out your activity that's going to limit both your fatigue and it's going to enhance recovery. Then it's also going to fit your schedule. So as I mentioned before, being sedentary and sitting is an independent contributor, which works against your health and fitness, even if you're regularly training. So a lot of people believe that doing a workout once a day or at least 5 times a week is enough to improve their health. But it's actually been shown that if you're spending the majority of your day sedentary, like when you're at work, it's harmful to your health. So really what I suggest is you don't want to be sitting for more than 1 to 2 hours at a time. So what I have a lot of clients do that are busy, office workers, or they're professionals and they can't really fit in a lot of activity, is just set an alarm and do a few minutes of either walking, or I'll have them do push-ups in the bathroom or air squats every hour or so. And you can utilize these small movement breaks and just inject them throughout your day. And this has been shown to be better for health than doing all your exercise in one shot. So there has been multiple studies with especially type 2 diabetics or those that suffer with insulin resistance, where they'll compare them having them move for 5 minutes every hour throughout a workday as compared to doing an equivalent cardio session in one bout. And with that, in these studies, we see that they have better improvements in their blood sugar regulation, their blood pressure, and their blood lipids. So there's an independent benefit of spreading out your movement frequently throughout the day to minimize sedentary activity. And this is also something we can all implement into our days, because you can simply go outside for a walk or walk stairs in your house for 5 to 10 minutes multiple times throughout the day, rather than getting ready and going to the gym for one long, hour session of cardio at the end of your day. And there's also other research that shows a benefit from incorporating exercise snacks into your day, both from an insulin sensitivity and a metabolic perspective. And this is also an easy way to increase your energy expenditure. So there's actually a study by Dempsey on the benefits of interrupting prolonged sitting with brief periods of low intensity activity, where they took people and they either had them sit for the duration of an 8-hour workday, or they had them do a light form of physical activity for 6 minutes every hour. And throughout the course of the study, they provided them with 3 high carbohydrate, high calorie dense meals. And during the trial, this consisted of, I believe, 115 grams of carbs and 30 grams of fat. So these were pretty dense meals, especially for sedentary, populations. And then they use these to test their post-meal metabolic responses. And in the group that just implemented 6 minutes of low intensity activity for every 60 minutes that they were seated throughout the 8-hour workday, they saw massive improvements and significant improvements in their glucose and insulin levels. So it was able, like we spoke about, I spoke about a study last week where they did 3 15-minute walks post-meal. Well, if you don't have that time and you can't do it exactly post-meal, even just dividing 6 minutes every hour. So for 10% of the time you spend seated, if you just do a walk or do a bout of activity or get up and stay active, you're going to have massive benefits to both your blood glucose, your energy expenditure, and then also your insulin levels.
And also your cognition and ability to focus at work, because that's one of the reasons that the PEC, I do 50 minutes with a 10-minute break to give people enough time to like snap out and snap in. I am similar to you. The one big thing, I know we actually got a question about treadmill death, so I won't really get into it, but there's another thing that I recommend that B didn't touch on, is you can get like these pedals that go underneath your desk and just kind of pedal. It's just doing something. And I agree with B, it should be important to stand, but let's just assume you're on those 2 to 3 hour Zooms that just don't give, and you're in IT or something like that. It's just constant grind. You can get one of those pedals and just do it
like
underneath
20
your
bucks.
desk.
I used to use one in a
Yeah.
corporate office that I worked at, and no one even noticed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's at least doing something. The goal is just to get the blood pumping and the blood moving. We're not meant, every old person I've ever talked to who like is always smiling and has good health and stuff like that. I have a few in my gym, they're over 80. They just say, hey, I stay active all the time. I never stop moving. And I can tell you that the people in public that you don't want to look like when you're 80, those are the people who stopped moving. So there's some truth to that. Now, all right. Question 3. How did the 10K step goal become the standard? Is there research behind it? Yes. B, I will let you take that one.
Right. So the 10,000 steps per day metric standard for movement actually dates all the way back to 1965, when a company called the Yamaha Clock and Instrument Company released their pedometer. It was like the first pedometer of their kind, and they called it something in Japanese. I think it was Manpo Kai or something along those lines. And really what this directly translated to in Japanese was 10,000 step meter. So although this target wasn't initially set with data behind it, it actually now has some solid research behind it as a good number to shoot for, especially when it comes to losing weight and maintaining that weight loss, because we see that high levels of physical activity are one of the top correlating factor behind weight loss maintenance. So for example, we have a study by Cressy that found that hitting 10,000 steps per day with around 3,500 of those steps being done at a moderate to high intensity activity level. So actually, when we look into literature on what constitutes a moderate level activity, it's at least 100 steps or more per minute. So within a 10-minute bout, that would be, over 1,000 steps, which many of us get because I go on walks all the time and I'm clocking, 1,200 steps per 10 minutes. And so it's a brisk pace, but it's not anything, where you're overtly exerting yourself. And this 10,000 steps per day was associated with enhanced weight loss outcomes in a behavioral intervention. So what they had people do was they said, listen, we're going to give you a pedometer, we're going to give you a step counter. And one of the interventions we want is there's going to be 10,000 steps per day, and 3,500 of those, we want you to do it at a brisk pace. The rest of the 10,000 steps could be throughout the course of your day, whether you're cleaning or gardening, or you're playing with your kids, or you're at the grocery store. And just 3,500 of those, so let's say 35 minutes of that was a little bit more of a brisk walk, and that was intentional. And then we also have a study by Schneider that looked at 10,000 steps per day and as an exercise prescription over a 9-month study, and found that it led to favorable outcomes in weight loss. So that's
yeah. And the biggest thing is you also had that one we talked about in the last episode. Yeah. Remember, we also do have that research that we talked about in the last podcast. I believe it was the one before, discussing that anyone who was over 7,000 steps a day had a lower cause of mortality. And once it got up to around 10, it seemed to be like really beneficial, and then kind of like tapered, and then it fell off at a certain point, didn't get any better. So 10K, I think, is just an active goal. I think it's an easy number for people to focus on, and it's not unreasonable for people to hit. When people really try, for the most part, they can get damn near it, if not over it. So it's a goal that I think that most people should consider getting all the time, especially if they have like Brandon said, they're an active couch potato, meaning they're going to go to that gym, they're going to beat the shit out of that gym, but then they're going to go home and sit around and do nothing for hours.
They're seated throughout the course of their day. Just try to inject some movement throughout your day and have a goal to shoot for. That's something external that you could aim for on a daily basis. If you don't hit it, don't beat yourself up, but just try to average it out throughout the course of the week. We're looking for trends over time, and average is not just one day isn't going to make or break anything. It's the average of what you do over time. And fitness and health and even business is all about the law of repeated efforts done consistently over time. It's what you do over the course of a week, a month, and years that really compound and have a domino effect on the results that you receive, not what you do in one day.
I agree 100% with what you just said there. And that's why I try to tell people you got to set aim to things, because it's not bad when you set aim to things. It gives you a focus. Now, question 4, why wear a weighted vest? Well, when you add more weight, obviously you're going to add more to your caloric burn per what you're doing for the steps. And that's probably the best good reason I have for it. In all honesty, I know that there's I believe a research study, Brandon, or 2 talking about this, which I know you're well versed in. So I will let you happily discuss that. But basically, when you add that weight on, it's just helping with your caloric burns, like I talk to my clients about. And sans someone having a low back issue, or sans someone like being really overweight and still needing to lose more weight, as you drop 20 pounds, getting a weighted vest and putting 10 pounds in and then working your way up to 20 again over time will definitely help you as far as getting more out of it. Like, example for me, you're trying to heat yourself up, you're trying to get a little extra going, because as you get more in shape, it's harder to get your heart rate up. It's part of the reason why I am in my garage with a heater on me and sweats with a bike on, biking at 4 a.m. It takes all that, like, to basically get my heart rate up to about 120. I have to be hot. So there's just different ways to skin a cat, but the weighted vest has some good research behind it, which I'll let you touch base on.
Yeah, so the concept of using a weighted vest during steps is actually something that I've been using myself since I prepped for the 2008 MPC North Americans. And that was around the time that I started seeing literature about it. And I started, getting curious about it. It was before really anyone was speaking about it. I actually had a client that he was based down in Texas, and there was this guy Eric Lee Salazar, I believe is his name, and he ended up being an IFBB pro, but he was utilizing this weighted apparel. And so my client asked me about it, and I said, listen, let me look into the research and look into literature. I haven't seen anything about it. And at that time, it was very scant. So I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
At the time, but it made sense to me, logistically. And so at the time, I was working a corporate job in an office environment, which was really highly monitored. So it limited my activity. Like my boss was on me at all times. So I would do these walking breaks, these exercise snacks and stuff. But what I wanted to do was I needed to find a way to increase my energy expenditure when I did do steps, when I had the opportunity, before work, during my lunch break, and then, after my workout. I needed a way to increase energy expenditure and be able to maintain a deficit. And this is also something I turned you on to, and Jason Theobald, when I appeared on the Excellence Cartel last summer, and I spoke about, energy flux in that 2-part series, because that was something I suggested both of you do, especially Jason, because he was hitting a stall and he had been doing steps. And I said, listen, let's, increase the weighted vest on that to make up for the weight that you've lost. So just so you guys understand some of the mechanisms of action behind it, like Jeff said, I'll dive into literature on it, which it's very limited. So I do want to make that apparent. But even just like from a logistical standpoint, you're going to be increasing your weight during cardio and steps by using a weighted vest or any type of weighted apparel. And this is an effective way to increase your energy expenditure, or essentially the energy cost of exercise, as a heavier body requires more calories to move it. And the reason I personally do this, especially when I diet, is as you lose weight, one of the main metabolic adaptations we see is a significant decrease in the amount of calories we burn per day. As a lighter body, not only burns less calories at rest due to your basal metabolic rate lowering, which we've spoken about, but also weight loss in and of itself causes a significant reduction in NEAT and an increase in what's called skeletal muscle work efficiency. And these all lower your total daily energy expenditure, or the amount of calories that you burn per day. And so we see that in literature that the declines in NEAT are significantly correlated with the increases in the skeletal muscle work efficiency that happens during dieting periods. So the increase in this work efficiency essentially refers to your muscles expending less calories to do the same amount of work that it did when you were a heavier, larger individual. So as you get lighter, as you lose weight, as you become leaner, your body needs to work, less. It's more efficient in the work that it's doing because it's trying to conserve calories, but you're also lighter, so you're burning less calories for both of those reasons. So what I do personally with the vest is I replace the amount of weight that I've lost with either weight on a vest, or sometimes, I'll do that with the vest, but also sometimes I'll add even more. So I'm able to burn more through, I'll burn through more calories in the same amount of time and the same amount of steps that I'm usually doing. And it mimics the weight that I would usually carry around when I'm not in a dieted down state. And there's also a small body of research on increasing your weight via external apparel and how it has other benefits besides just the amount of calories you burn perspective. So we see that in some of the literature, it'll help with the suppression of your appetite, and it helps manage hunger, which is something so many of us struggle with during a diet. So there was actually a study, and I want to make this clear, this was done in rodents, it was not done in humans, and you'll hear why, but there was a study done in rodents where they implanted pellets, so metal pellets, in their abdomen, and the rodents spontaneously lost body fat to the point where they lost enough weight that their body weight was the same as it was when they started without the addition of these pellets. So say that they put in, hypothetically, obviously rodents are very small, but say they were 5 pounds and they added 2 pounds. Well, rodents went down to 3 pounds, and now with those 2 pound additions of the pellets, now they were back to being 5 pounds. And there was also another proof of concept study that was actually done in humans where they specifically used a weighted vest, and they took participants and either had them wear either, I believe, 1% or 11% of their body weight as a vest.
You are correct on that. It was 1 or 11, I believe.
So if someone was 180 pounds, for instance, they'd either wear a 1.8 pound vest or an 18-pound vest. And they had each person wear the vest for 9 hours throughout the course of their day for a 3-week trial. But the thing is, they didn't have them do any exercise and did not have them change their diets. And when they looked at the results, the heavier weighted vest group lost 4.4 pounds in 3 weeks. So that's pretty substantial, which was 5 times the amount of weight loss from the light vest group. So by utilizing, say, an 18-pound vest as compared to a 1.8-pound vest, they lost 5% more, or 5 times more weight. And this is what researchers refer to as the gravastat effect. So basically what happens with this is our bones sense our body weight. So if we increase loading on our bones, it causes them to sense an increase in body weight, which activates something in the muscle or something in the bone called osteocytes that signal to the body that there's additional weight that's been gained, which will cause a reduction in appetite. So, this will cause us to lose weight to bring you back down to your body fat settling point, as your body wants to maintain homeostasis. So it's the same thing we see that when we do overfeeding studies, a lot of times we'll upregulate NEAT and we'll downregulate our appetite. We'll be less hungry because we've gained weight. So the body wants to fight, it fights for homeostasis. And so this is actually an approach that I've used with many clients over the years, especially those that have to lose a lot of weight. Because I want to help to mitigate some of the effects of metabolic adaptation, such as the reduction in their energy expenditure and the increases in hunger. And I found it to be beneficial in practice. And there's also some, theories out there by a lot of, prominent researchers that you might be able to preserve more lean mass during a deficit or during a dieting phase from carrying around a heavier body weight through the usage of weighted apparel. And, we know this is going to increase energy expenditure. So that's going to be one benefit. So you might have to do less and you'll be able to maintain muscle as well. But also, if you're increasing energy expenditure, you're getting yourself in a high flux state, and you're also able to diet on more calories, which in and of itself is going to help with muscle retention. So this is, some of the theories behind this.
Yeah, last year when I did the steps, I was using the weighted vest probably the last 4 weeks. And I really didn't drop much weight during my prep. I began my prep at 182 and I held like 170 for about 6 weeks. I can say that I did retain more muscle, I thought, than in other preps, and my anabolics were considerably lower. So yeah, no, there's some truth to all that. I always just tell clients like this, because you got to take a look at, because you're going to have the simplified version. It's just going to help you burn more energy if you can tolerate it. And as long as your joints can handle it, as long as you don't have low back issues or weak abdomen or something like that, it's something to add after you get a few months of walking underneath you, because it'll just make it harder, but don't go get a 40-pound vest and start taking your steps.
Some day one.
Yes, you'll overdo it and you'll be fucked up.
I will say that I always titrate it up, just like I do with steps. Yep. It's not like someone comes to me doing 7,000 steps and I put them on 15,000. It's like you slowly titrate up things. So if someone's lost 5-10 pounds, I might replace it with 5-10 pounds. What I did personally, and I will be frank with you guys, I did a long dieting phase for the NPC North Americans. And I probably lost about 17 pounds throughout the course of that contest prep. And I used 30 pounds by the end of that prep, because I really needed to maximize every single step that I did. And I really wanted to increase energy expenditure. And that's the best I ever looked. My heaviest stage weight, I was peeled. So, that was just my perspective. But now that I'm removed from contest prep, I'm removed from competing a few years, I don't utilize that same method. But for instance, I'm in a mini cut right now. I threw on a 10-pound vest and I utilized it even when I was at your place. I just like using it now. And it's not, it's something your body's going to adapt to everything that you give it, whether it's something you give it within training or in cardio or in steps or in food. So my body has completely adapted to it, where I feel light actually when I don't have the vest on and I go do cardio. Like, it's significantly easier. And then, like you were mentioning, it's hard for me to get my heart rate up.
Yep, 100%. So basically, if you're already taking steps and you're pretty active, you should consider a weighted vest, perhaps. If not, is what it is. It's great research though on it, Brandon. Now, last thing, treadmill desk. I think my simplified version to it is it's going to be able to help you get to your 10,000 steps. It's going to be able to keep you more active. I did a podcast with this guy, Lucas Annon, on TEC like last year. And he was doing 20,000 steps a day with his walking treadmill, because he was just at his desk that much. And I don't think you have to do it, but there is research on it. Correct, Brandon? Talking about the treadmill desk. Yeah, no. And I'd love for you to, but here's the deal. If you have a job and you work from home, and you're on Zoom and you're doing different things, a treadmill desk is a really good asset to consider. They are not that expensive. They will help you be more active. They will help you. There's just a host of things that you can sit here and say. And I think Brandon and I have insulted and assaulted you guys with, or should I say, I guess just assaulted you guys with over time. But I always tell my clients, like, hey, you're going to want to be more active. The treadmill desk is going to be one way to do it. You should consider using this. And here's why, because, I think it's more important to get people active than always throwing them all these high-end supplement protocols that you need to fix up front. Because if you can't keep people active, you can't really get people healed, is what I've kind of come to understand and notice about this, especially over the last few years of the hormone emergence and all the digestive issues that we've had going on out there, like the gut health stuff. What does the research say, though? on the
Yeah, so
treadmill?
actually,
Because I know
treadmill.
you're the guy for you're the research guy.
No, you always put me in that position, but here's
I
the
just
thing: I
like
know the
giving you
research
shit.
because I've implemented this myself, and I wanted to know, hey, listen, I'm finding results in these methodologies and with these tactics. Is there research behind this? And everything that I preach about and I practice, everything I preach about, I practice myself, and I've experimented with myself. The weighted vest, I didn't tell anyone about. I didn't have a client use until about a year later after I had already done it. Energy flux, same type of concept. And so with the treadmill desk, this was actually, a lot of people don't realize this. This was actually made from an obesity researcher
Mm-hmm.
named Dr. James Levine. And so what he did was he did a study in the office and in the workplace, and he wanted to find mechanisms or ways to increase their energy expenditure, the calories they burn per day, to limit their sedentary time and to increase productivity in the workplace. And so they did a study comparing walk and work desks compared to just being at a stationary desk. And so what they had people do was, these were sedentary individuals, and so they didn't have them use a treadmill desk for the entire day, but he actually rolled out the first of its kind treadmill desk. He worked at, I believe, the Mayo Clinic, and so they built these models, and it was really rudimentary. So it was not what we see now with treadmill desks. And even this was early 2000s, so even the treadmills that they had access to are not the same, high grade treadmills like you have at your gym, or we even
Mm-hmm.
have customarily at gyms. And so what they had people do was, they had people work a regular 8-hour workday, and they would have them go into two different conditions. And in one condition, they would stay seated throughout the course of the day, and they would accurately measure their energy expenditure. And then in the other condition, they would have them split up the course of their day and essentially split their day in half. So they'd be doing 1 hour seated, 1 hour walking, 1 hour seated, 1 hour walking. But what they did was, these people were sedentary. They weren't active individuals. So they had them just walk at 1 mile per hour. And what they saw was, when they measured their energy expenditure through, very, direct calorimetry, so very precise measurements of the amount of calories they burn per day, they saw that in the hours that they were active, and they were walking just 1 mile per hour. So that's the starting speed on a treadmill. Like, you can't go any slower than that.
No
And so they
shit.
saw that they burned an extra 119 calories per hour throughout the course of that period. And so on average, they burned, the average person burns almost 500 calories extra a day over the course of that 5-day work week. So they were burning 2,500 calories more per week. And so they lost about 2/3 of a pound just as a result of that. And so this is not only great to increase your energy expenditure, to offset the negative and deleterious effects of seating, but we also see in the literature that different lines of literature show that when you're up and active and moving during your workday, in terms of, it doesn't even have to be your workday, but if you're trying to do cognitively and mentally demanding tasks, we see an increase in productivity while being up and active as compared to seated, that you will get an increase of 11 to 15% increase in cognition, mental acuity, so your sharpness, your ability to retain information and dispel information. And that's why I often tell people, listen, I do a lot of my lectures, walking. I'll listen to a lot of podcasts walking. I'll take notes walking. I do all my content walking. So I do a lot of my emails walking, a lot of my calls. And so if anything's mentally demanding and I have the opportunity, I'll just go out and walk. You don't have to have a treadmill desk, but if you're someone that you need to stay within the confines of, say, an office, you're an online coach like we are, you could easily invest. And this could even be like, there are treadmill desks, and you can get them used for between $800 and $1,000. Other models that are a little bit higher end and new rather, they're about $1,600 to $2,000. But guys, honestly, you could even utilize one of those folding treadmills that are only a couple $100s that you could fold under your bed. Jeff, have you ever seen those?
Yeah, I've seen those. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, super convenient. And you could just prop up your laptop or whatever. You could do work on your phone, and you could just incorporate these bouts throughout the course of your day. You can get, what I did in my last apartment, I didn't have room. And when I lived up north close to New York City, I just didn't have room in my place for a treadmill. So I used a stationary bike that was small, that was convenient, that I could fold up. And I would do, I'd prop my computer up on there. I had a monitor there. And so I would prop that up. I would use my phone, and I would, type away, and I would just do, it's not this high intensity activity. This is neat. This is just physical activity and movement. So it's not like you're not breaking a sweat. And the biggest advantage to this is you could work, use your work clothes. You know what I mean? If you have to dress up for work, it's not like you're actually doing that much that you're burning a sweat. And another thing that I've utilized with a lot of my business professionals that do a lot of Zoom calls, I've just told them, listen, see if they're fine. If you have 8 Zoom calls a day, so you're on Zoom for 8 hours a day, see if you could take 1 to 2 of those walking. and just at a slow pace, and you're in the confines of your office or in your home. A lot of them will have, like, I have a lot of clients that built out home gyms in their basements. And so they have a treadmill there. They, wear their regular apparel, whether it's a polo or whatever it is, and they're just walking slowly. So no one even notices. They have headphones on, so no one hears the treadmill. They're going so slow that they're not breaking a sweat nor making any noise. And they're able to infuse and inject these exercise bouts in an easy way that they honestly get huge benefits from. And they also notice that they're a little bit sharper. And a big thing, and I noticed this because I did work in a corporate environment for quite a long time, was that I would get sleepy throughout the course of my day. You know what I mean? You're at the desk, even especially after meals. And a lot of people tell me they get that 2 or 2:30 feeling and they need to get a coffee. Well, instead of going and getting a Starbucks and spending $8 at this point, why don't you just go for a walk? You know what I mean? Even if you're working while you're doing it. So it's these little things, these little habits that stack up over time and that really pay dividends over the long haul.
I think a lot of it too is people have to kind of like look at their office has more than just like being chained to that desk. Like that they have permission to be able to walk while they're on the meetings and take care of their physical activity. And I'd like to point out a few things. Steve Jobs, the late great Steve Jobs, always did all his meetings walking. Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talks about walking as a means to be able to have great conversation because it helps initiate flow. And then Friedrich Nietzsche, my favorite philosopher of all, he actually took walks to be able to do and flesh out some of his deepest thinking and probably some of his most controversial thoughts through walking. So walking has a lot of good stuff. So be active. If anything, like B said, man, it's going to make your day just be more broken up and you're going to not have as much slumps. That much I could say is true. And the cool thing is this, if you have trouble sleeping and you're active throughout the day at your desk, guess what? You're probably going to sleep better. It's just going to happen. Yeah. Well, we got through our 5 questions, man, and we did it right in an hour, I believe. So kudos to us, Brandon. We are doing better. And that was with us going down a hell of a weird hole in the first question.
Absolutely, my man.
B, where can everybody find you at, give you a follow, engage with you and all that?
Absolutely, guys. Feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at @BrandonDeCruz_. And for any questions, whether it be regarding the podcast or coaching, please feel free to reach out to me on my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com.
I am found on IG at Jeff Unbreakable Black. And then you guys can get a hold of me at Jeff at Relentless Forever. Feel free to engage on either platform. It's cool with me. But B, man, it was a pleasure as always. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, share, like, all that good shit. We really appreciate it. And have yourself a good day. Bye.